Over the past few weeks, we've been working through a sequence of ideas together. We began by looking at instability, not instability as a character flaw or a lack of hustle or lack of effort, but as something that might actually be structural in a solopreneur's business. And we looked at what happens when business models collide, and we looked at what happens when the business's identity and the economics of that business don't match. And then we most recently looked at the difference between accidental seams and deliberate seams, the difference between business model drift and strategic business model architecture. So today, then, that means that the question becomes more direct. It's not what services do you offer? What services could you offer? It's not what tools do you know how to use? It's not even what opportunities are available to you. The question becomes, what business are you actually building? What business do you want to be in? This question matters because businesses is always being shaped by something. It's shaped by owner decisions. It's shaped by client demand. It's shaped by money pressure. It's shaped by the owner's identity. It's shaped by fear. It is, in fact, shaped by opportunities. And the issue is, if the owner never declares what business is being built deliberately, the business will take a shape, but it will not take the shape that the owner declares. And this is why I'm asking Dave to join us for this conversation. Can, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Dave has worked across multiple industries, different kinds of organizations, and at different tiers of business and nonprofit responsibility. And he has seen in the real world what happens when owners are clear, and he has seen what happens when they are not clear. One of the reasons this matters is that business confusion is not only a strategic issue, it becomes an operational issue, a leadership issue, a role issue, and a personal issue. So today, what we're going to do is make this visible through the conversation. Dave, what I'd like you to do is tell us about a time when it became clear that the owner and the business were not describing the same thing, when the owner's vision and the actual things that were happening were not aligned. And you might want to start by just giving some context about who you are and what your background is,
Sure.
and then build into that question of identity of the business versus the identity of the owner.
Okay. Um, well, my background is I had over 30 years in manufacturing, working for both large corporations and medium to small businesses.
Mhm.
Um, my time working with the medium and small businesses was predominantly as what somebody today would call a COO, an operations
Mhm.
manager or officer. The owner generally of these companies were great technicians, and their business was in the area of their expertise as a technician. So
Mhm.
these were machine shops, and the guys that owned them were top of the line machinists.
Mhm.
But they started their own business, things grew, et cetera, and they eventually came to the place where they realized that while I can run a lathe really well, I have a hard time running a business that runs lathes. And so
Mhm.
I would come on board as the manager to help bring definition and growth and organization and structure to the business itself.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give you an example of one company that I worked for. The guy, the guy built his business on being able to respond to all of his friends that were purchasing agents for different companies. And so he would, they would have a like almost the impossible thing to get done. He would take it on. He would make it happen. So he might work 3 days straight at 16 hours a day in order to make it happen. And he was willing to do that in order to make
Mm-hmm.
it happen.
Mm-hmm.
But as the business grew and our market grew and all those kind of things, we were caught in a place where we couldn't any longer make those kind of commitments because it wasn't him doing the work, it
Mm-hmm.
was the company doing the work. And for either schedule purposes or whatever, this just did not fit into our schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Well, he had been, he was also the sales guy whenever he was out having lunch with his buddies. And so,
Mm-hmm.
we'll say, for instance, Kenworth Truck, who we did parts for, and they would have a problem, and he would respond to them and say, "Oh, I can get it done." Then
Mm-hmm.
he would bring it back to us, and we would look at the schedule and we say, "There's no time available for that to happen." And he would say, "Well, it has to happen. I promised." And and so we finally got to the place where we told the owner, okay, and this is not an easy conversation. We told the owner, "You can no longer sell time on the equipment without
Checking the
talking to us."
schedule.
Yeah,
Yeah.
talking to us first.
Uh-huh.
Because he would say, "Oh, well, just leave this machine and that machine open and I'll come in over the weekend and I'll make the parts."
Uh-huh.
And we'd all come in on Monday morning. Those machines would still be in pristine condition, ready to go. There would be no parts. And now we were under, under the gun. He would be upset with himself because he knew he didn't do what he said he was going to do.
Mm-hmm.
We'd be upset with him because of this, that, and the other. And so we finally came to the conclusion, you can't sell the time on the equipment, Chuck. It's just not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was a thing that where his because of his business growth and expansion, he was unable to do what he used to be able to do when he was just a solopreneur.
Mm-hmm.
And so with growth comes boundaries. There comes, just things that you can and can't do anymore just because you got 24 hours in a day. You don't have, it's not metric time. The Beatles talked about metric time, 8 days a week and all that kind of thing. but you just physically had to work within the boundaries and parameters that we established. And so while his heart was good and we
Mm-hmm.
knew, that he wasn't trying to get us or anything like that,
Mm-hmm.
it just did not work out for him. And so we had to begin to make these rules for the boss. And that's
Mm-hmm.
always hard. So even as a solopreneur, it's important for you to set boundaries for yourself and know that you need to live within these restrictions in order to maintain your sanity and a few other things.
Mm-hmm.
So that was an example of one opportunity.
Yeah. But I think that's Dave, I think that's exactly right. And for the solopreneur who can work 16, 18 hours a day on a surge basis on occasion,
Sure.
um, you can make promises based on that, but you have an intuitive sense of how much you can produce. When you have when you start over promising, then then that's on you.
It
Um,
is.
but at the same time, having a sense of what your boundaries are going into it allows you to not overpromise when
Right.
that allows you to give yourself those guardrails
Right.
in the first place. And then as you build a bench as you build capacity within your with if you decide you want an organization, you start building capacity in an organization, then that capacity gets to become part of your boundaries. You could expand your boundaries a little bit. Um, when you were in a consulting advising kind of role, were there signals you could see that would tell you that the owner didn't even hadn't really decided what those boundaries were?
Oh yeah, lots of times because they in the beginning you go into it and you got to make money because you got to live.
Mm-hmm.
And so you make choices based on the fact that I need to generate income. But as your business grows, even if you remain as a solopreneur, but now you got a half a dozen or a dozen clients that are
Mm-hmm.
using you on a fairly regular basis. You've got to be careful that you don't burn bridges
Mm-hmm.
with existing clients trying to satisfy new requirements by a new opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So you just can't run willy nilly. I'll give you an example. I had a lady that she had a store that she sold fresh spices and teas and that kind of thing, and that was her primary business. But she had all these other things that she'd added. She had bamboo clothing and she had books that would sit on the shelf for 2 years and never sell.
Mm-hmm.
She had statuary things and stuff like that that really weren't her primary business.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I had to sit down and talk to her about it is I said, you've got to narrow in and get rid of some of these peripheral businesses that you have because you have items sitting on the shelf that are now worth nothing
Mm-hmm.
because they didn't sell. And, and so now you have the revenue to support that that's been spent, but you can't regain that. And I said, so we spent probably a good 6 months going through her inventory and different things like that and weeding out things that weren't her primary business.
Mm-hmm.
So in essence, I was helping her to define what is your business?
Mm-hmm.
What are you selling?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was good for her just
Mm-hmm.
because she wouldn't have to come in and look at this stuff that had been sitting on the shelf forever and never sold.
Mm-hmm.
And so it becomes exactly what you talked about, defining what your business is. What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Where are you making your money? We'd analyze, the things that she had because she never thought about the fact, oh, I paid for this statuary and
Mm-hmm.
now it sits
Mm-hmm.
and I never get my money back.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's just it's a lost thing. And it was stuff she was interested in,
Mm-hmm.
but definitely not her business.
And she was interested in it, but her customer wasn't because her customer wasn't coming to her to buy statuary or books. Her customer was coming to her to buy spices
That's
and
right. And
teas.
yes, and things like that. So um,
Yeah.
and it was a difficult conversation
Yeah.
because she couldn't necessarily understand why, if she'd already paid for it and it was sitting on the shelf, why it was bad for her business.
Mm-hmm.
So
But at very least it's a distraction.
totally,
Mm-hmm.
totally.
And then there's also the emotional component that you hinted at, where she's seeing this thing on her shelves every day.
Right.
It's actually taking up shelf space, which has an opportunity cost.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and um, and it's also weighing an emotional cost, but she may not be able to measure that. Probably can't
Yeah.
measure that.
Right.
I um I appreciate this conversation because it ties to the idea that the business isn't waiting for the owner to become clear. It just starts taking shape. And
Yeah.
and if we don't have that authority to say this is what it's going to be, then it just drifts
Yeah.
by convenience or by when the customer says, "Can you do this too?" hey, here's some money. If somebody throws some money at me, and then I start doing that thing, but that might not be where I intended to go. And
Right.
suddenly I'm down a path that isn't my core business, isn't my core expertise. Um,
Right.
and I think those things are why this topic matters.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. So in your observation, what changes when the owner gets clear about what business they're in, and more importantly, what business they're not in?
Well, I think one of the things it does is it creates in their mind a target. This is what I'm after.
Mm-hmm.
I would always tell my clients, I said, anybody can hit the back wall of a shooting gallery, you know, but you need to put a target up there so you know what you're aiming at. And I think it's very important that you begin to decide that, because now your marketing, your training, your thrust of your business, and all that kind of thing takes on a defined, um, I'll say, a defined area.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and and that's important that you have that, and every target I've ever seen has a bullseye, because that's always what you're aiming at.
Mm-hmm.
It may not be what you hit, but you're always aiming at that bullseye. And
Mm-hmm.
as you can better define your business and bring it into that tighter and tighter into that bullseye,
Mm-hmm.
the more successful you're going to be, providing you've done your homework properly and know there's a market for it, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but it just helps you define. So now your choices and your decisions are made off of that target.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you have experience at sighting in a rifle or something like that, you know, you'll take a couple shots and then you'll say, I need to adjust my scope 2 clicks to the right because I'm consistently shooting off,
Mm-hmm.
and now you're fine tuning something rather than just like shotgunning it and just
Mm-hmm.
to blast out everywhere,
And
and you
hoping to
may
hit
have some.
something.
Yeah, you may have some success, but you don't really know why.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing with that byline I had, was helping businesses recognize their business, their customer, all that type of thing on purpose, rather than just hoping something's going to happen, hoping the phone's going to ring, hoping this, hoping that. Phone ringing, I'll give an example. Almost every client that I had would tell me the horror story of some advertising expense that they'd made that wasn't successful.
Mm-hmm.
So and so's got a marketing magazine that goes out to a gazillion people or whatever. And if you sign up with me and spend this $1,000 for a
Mm-hmm.
year and advertise in my magazine, your phone's going to ring off the hook. Well, they spend the 1,000, they're advertising in the magazine, and the phone doesn't even ring,
Right.
you know? And I said, well, it's not their fault. And people didn't like to hear that generally. I said, the problem, it's your fault because you're not hitting your target market. I mean, their magazine and
Mm-hmm.
all that kind of thing may have done great for other people, but that's because the magazine was impacting people in your target market.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're advertising, um, I had a
Mm-hmm.
lady with a furniture company that was so proud that she had an ad on television. Well, it was her ads would run at like 2 and 3 in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and she was selling generally to more elderly people and that kind of thing. And there's those people are up at 2 or 3 in the morning.
Right.
You're
And
not hitting your
and the
market.
young and the young families aren't either.
No.
The kids are who's up at 2 and 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So anyway,
like
there's
the
just
20 something kids, not the
yeah, no, I understand.
the teenagers, um, but not the
Right,
parents, the 20
right,
somethings.
right. So yeah, it's really, it's really being able to better and better define your market, define your product, define your service, whatever that might be. Because
Mm-hmm.
I talked to a guy that had a mechanic business, and I said, well, who's your customer? And he says, well, everybody's my customer.
Anybody with a car.
Everybody owns a car. And I said, yeah, that's true. However, they don't all come to you for a variety of reasons. So
Uh-huh.
figure out what part of the market you're impacting
Mm-hmm.
and focus in on that and go after that. Well,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but what about this other guy that's outside the target? I said, look, you'll
It,
always gather people that are outside your target, but you want to find out what your target
mm-hmm.
is
Mm-hmm.
and then go after it.
Yeah.
So you may have a product on Fiverr, but
Mm-hmm.
everybody on Fiverr hasn't contacted you to do their job.
Mm-hmm.
So it's analyzing your market. Who is that?
Mm-hmm.
Who are the people that respond to what I'm doing, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, the using the auto mechanic, the people who are always going to get their car serviced at the dealership where they bought the car are always going to get their car serviced at the dealership where they bought the car. They're not going to come to you as an
Right.
independent mechanic. So figure out where they're listening and don't and if the people who are looking for an independent mechanic aren't listening there, stop communicating on that channel.
Yeah.
Communicate on the channel where the people are interested in finding an independent mechanic.
Right.
Um, if you're um, if you're marketing web design services on Fiverr, um, I'm trying to find a really clear, the person who's going to hire a Madison Avenue marketing agency isn't going to come look isn't on Fiverr.
Right.
Um, there are different market segments. Um, but not everybody, and the point I think that you made, Dave, is not everybody coming on Fiverr is using the same search criteria because what's important to each of those people that's looking for the service is different. So
Right.
finding the way you describe your service in a way that fits a particular niche, so you have a bullseye. Then occasionally somebody that's just slightly outside that bullseye, using the example the visualization you use is exactly right. The ideal target market is a subset of all the people who could possibly buy from you. And if you
Right.
occasionally get somebody from slightly in the periphery, that's bonuses.
Yeah.
Um, can you describe a situation where you saw a business that was actually trying to do too many things at once? And I don't know. So the lady with the teas and spices, that maybe you already gave that best example because that was as soon as I asked the question out loud, I realized that was basically the message of that example.
Yeah.
Um,
I did work with people like that, but I soon worked very hard to steer them away from such a broad
mhm.
market to narrow it down. Um,
Yeah.
and and so and I know sometimes we're attracted by shiny objects, but some shiny objects are good. So
Mm-hmm.
I worked with a lady that made gift baskets.
Uh-huh.
In fact, I'm sure that you knew her. The gift basket diva was
Mm-hmm.
what she was called.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she did a lot of different things and could come up with all kinds of variety of baskets. And if you put 5 baskets setting out, you could always pick out hers because she really truly was the gift basket diva. But we were trying to get into the commercial market,
Mm-hmm.
uh, not people buying something for their wife or their girlfriend or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but to be for people to buy baskets to give to the people that maybe rented real estate from them, so they have an
Mm-hmm.
office building or something, and they had a number of different clients. Well, we really didn't want to offer a lot of variety, but we wanted to offer something that was targeted more. So the baskets were more the same. They were,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't all the creativity. It was the initial creativity and then duplication, that type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were working very hard at that. And at the same time, we were trying to create something that would appeal to, say, yourself and myself, um, getting a basket for my wife or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and her
Mm-hmm.
interests and so forth. And so we came up with what we affectionately called the Hero Club. And what it would do is it would allow you as a husband
Mm-hmm.
to fill out a card, identify two holidays. So let's say Mother's Day and your anniversary
Mm-hmm.
that you wanted a gift basket made for.
Mm-hmm.
You would put down what your some of the interests maybe of your wife, and you put it down, and it would go into a database.
Mm-hmm.
So about a month before, let's say it was your anniversary, you get an email from the gift basket diva that
Mm-hmm.
said, just wanted to remind you that we are prepared to make a gift basket for you, for your wife, for your anniversary. In case you'd
Mm-hmm.
forgotten, it's a reminder. And then we would do that. And if they prepaid, they would get discount on their
Mm-hmm.
baskets,
Mm-hmm.
etc. So, but it was creating a hero club so that you wouldn't have that look of shock on your face when you wake up in the morning and go off to work and realize, oh my God, it's our
I gotta have
anniversary.
something. I have to have something by the time I get home tonight.
Yeah. Uh, and so it really was. It would
Mm-hmm.
our the motto was, we'll take a zero and make you a hero.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So that was a novel, shiny object,
Mm-hmm.
but it worked out well. We
Yeah.
had we had a lot of people sign up for that.
Yeah.
So there's things that as you go about and do things, you may see something that, wow, that's a great idea, and it absolutely is a great idea, but it
Mm-hmm.
ties in totally with what already exists in your business.
Right. It's not a
It's
brand,
just
it's not a diversion. It's not a
exactly.
distraction.
It's a novelty,
It's
right?
but the core structure of how you fulfill that service is the exact same thing that was already the core of your business.
Right.
The example you're talking about is, and let's see if my little background thing will show correctly. If I move out of the way, if I can move out of the way of the camera, that's the lifetime value of the customer issue,
Right.
right?
Right.
Is the how you build that repeat business on your existing core offer,
Right.
not by trying to add something that's totally a separate,
Totally.
an entirely different line of business, and try to somehow pretend that it's aligned with your
All part of
current.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, it like I can imagine a situation where somebody is a mobile auto detailer,
Right.
and they show up in somebody's driveway and they say, "Well, I can pressure wash your driveway too." Well, okay, yes, you could, but that's two totally different sets of tools that you have to
Right.
bring. And and if you're just doing it on the spur of the moment, that means you now have to go get this whole nother set of capabilities.
Right.
Um, yeah. All right. Because what stands out here is the idea that the parallel options, the shiny objects, aren't reckless. They are potentially reasonable decisions. They're the idea of adding an offer or a service, and as long as those adjacent responsibilities make sense, then it's there. Then pursue them. If they fall within that bullseye, then pursue them. But when there's no predefined definition of what we're trying to build the business
Right.
to, then suddenly instead of having the bullseye becoming more clear, suddenly you have two different bullseyes, and it requires two different sets of either marketing or two different sets of
Sure.
fulfillment.
Yeah.
And now you're diversifying your effort, your available capacity. And
Right.
then what should become a strategic decision about merging those in the basket diva, creating the lifetime value offer revolving around the same product, or in the case of the
Right.
tea shop, realizing that you have this other product line that people aren't coming into the store and buying, and it's a diversion of effort, and it's an opportunity cost of cash that's captive. This becomes very expensive, and we talked about in one of the previous sessions where um, risk in business is measured financially.
Hmm.
It's measured in costs. We can see it on a profit and loss statement. We can see it on our cash flow statements. And if we don't, that's why what I'm talking about and have been talking about for the last 3.5 months or so is recognize having a mirror that we can hold up to ourselves and recognize what's happening with ourselves,
Right.
because allows us to make strategic decisions in the middle of the 20th century. Maybe people didn't have, certainly in the middle of the 19th century, people didn't have a multiplicity of opportunities. Maybe 100 years ago, people didn't have a multiplicity of opportunities. Today, every one of us has a vast array of opportunities in front of us every single day.
That's correct. Yeah.
And having a clear structure for deciding what opportunities belong in the business and which ones are, I would love to do that, but that doesn't make sense right now.
Yeah.
It- um, how do you distinguish between a business that's exploring which of these opportunities they should pursue, and the business that's saying, okay, this is where I'm going to go. This is the path I'm going to follow. Um, and I know you talked at the start about having people who were really good technicians,
Hmm.
um, and they build a business around their technical skill.
Hmm.
Um, how does that person decide I'm going to use my technical skill in this with that bullseye idea in this target,
Right.
as opposed to I have my technical skill and surely someone will hire me.
Right.
Hmm.
Well, I know that several of the shops that I worked for, the owner was, uh, I would say, in a specific aspect of the trade. So, for instance, you had lathes, there are mills, there's all these different things. It was hard to find a machinist that was a general machinist that could run everything efficiently.
Hmm.
Usually, they were. I worked for a company that the guys, a couple of companies, the guys were definitely good lathe hands. I also worked for companies where the guy was a very good mill hand,
Hmm.
but they weren't always good at everything, if I can put it that way.
Hmm.
And so their business tended to grow more into either lathes or mills or whatever, or
It,
that would be their strong suit for their business. So
hmm.
they wouldn't be going out to say Boeing and saying, I just want work. They
Hmm.
be saying, I want turning work or I want milling work or something like that. So it better defined who they were and it better defined how they marketed themselves. Because if you were a good lathe hand and you were trying to market yourself as a good mill hand, you wouldn't necessarily be able to produce what your competition could, we'll say, or
Hmm.
or what your client actually was looking for,
Mm-hmm.
etc. And
Mm-hmm.
so that, so just within the general machining world, that would narrow down your niche,
Mm-hmm.
and you might do a little bit of the other, but generally you're focused on this kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
So um, yeah,
Yeah.
so they were all machining, but they were different aspects of machining.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um, in the digital space, it's the difference between somebody who's doing web design and copy on the front side versus someone who's an SEO specialist on the back side of that same website.
Hmm.
Um, when when you're doing your consulting,
Hmm.
um, how what were some of the metrics or frameworks you would use to evaluate when the business was aligned between their capacity and their messaging?
Okay. Um, we had a Well, I'll give you an example in one shop that I worked where I wasn't the general manager. I was a different level manager. I did scheduling and did some sales and some things like that. And you could watch the business become cyclical. In other
Mm-hmm.
words, business would be booming, we doing really great, and then it would drop off and we wouldn't be doing so good. Well, in the analysis of that, it was an observation of mine regarding the general manager, because he was a guy that had come out of the shop.
Mm-hmm.
He was very good at solving problems. He could go up to a machine and they're having some kind of issue and he could resolve it very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that was his gifting. That was what he was really good at. But he'd kind of been promoted by the Peter principle. You get promoted until you are not successful.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is that you may be successful here, but here you're not so successful
Uh-huh.
because of your gifting, because of your talents, because of
Mm-hmm.
different aspects about you. And
Mm-hmm.
so what would happen is that in the downturn, we were coming off of being very busy. So he was forced to do more general manager kinds of things because we
Mm-hmm.
were so busy. He wasn't able to get out in the shop as much. And then we just hit a slow turn and he'd be out in the shop more because he didn't have all this other stuff to mess with. So he'd get out and do things he was gifted at.
Mm-hmm.
If this isn't answering your question, let me know. But
It's a good
um,
story. And it's a valuable insight.
so anyway, I was able to look at this over, I don't know, a period of maybe a year and a half, whatever, and I could see the cycle and
Mm-hmm.
I could see what the response was. And suddenly he'd be out in the shop more, our quality would go up, our delivery would go up, all that kind of thing. And then we get real busy again and he gets sucked back into this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so they ended up com- causing us to compete with each other. They basically told him if he can't keep business up and moving, and that kind of thing, then Dave's going to get your position and da 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 da. Well, we were friends. We weren't like drinking buddies or anything, but we worked well together.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went to them with this solution. I said, "Look, we're a medium-sized shop. We're not Boeing, and a
Mm-hmm.
name doesn't mean diddly." So he's general manager. So change his responsibilities as general manager. I can pick up some of the slack and I don't mind doing some of the stuff that he doesn't care about doing and
Mm-hmm.
keep him out in the shop. And I said, don't push us against each other. Let
Mm-hmm.
us work together.
Mm-hmm.
And they were, no, we're not going to do that. Yeah. So anyway, so a few weeks later, I quit.
Mm.
About 6 months later, he quit. So they lost two
They
good
lost both of you.
individuals because they lacked the vision to see how we could make this work together.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so anyway, but going back to your original question, here's the thing. There's a There's an old proverb that says, without vision, the people perish.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important to have vision because vision builds structure.
Mm-hmm.
Vision builds, and I'll say self structure, things,
Mm-hmm.
boundaries that you set for yourself that may not be for everybody. But
Mm-hmm.
once you decide you're going to be an Olympic runner, your whole life changes.
Mm-hmm.
Everything and all the decisions are about being training yourself to be in that Olympic competition.
Mm-hmm.
You know what
But
you
if you're Olympic runner, you're not in the swimming pool to become an Olympic swimmer.
right,
You're not on the ski slope to become an Olympic skier.
right.
You're running.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're in the weight room, you're doing squats, but you're not doing military presses.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And everything changes. Your diet
Mm-hmm.
changes. How you spend your free time changes.
Mm-hmm.
You generally hire a trainer, and you do all these things with a single goal in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I can tell you right now, there's nobody out there that trains for the bronze.
Mm-hmm.
I hope I can win the bronze. No, man, you're
I
shooting for the gold.
yeah. I just want on the podium.
Yeah, I don't care where.
No, I want to shoot for the exactly. I'm going to shoot again. We shoot for the bullseye.
Yeah,
If we happen to get a three ring as opposed to a five ring, we still call it good. If we get
yeah,
a five ring, we're
yeah,
also ran. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Um, so you had told me about a couple formulas you use that
yeah,
talk about aligning that effort with that bullseye.
yeah, yeah. These were things that over my time working with people, et cetera, I gained this insight, and a lot of it was based on myself, insight to myself, and especially true if you're a solopreneur, because the boundaries that you put upon yourself have to be well defined and I'll say critical, not just important, but critical.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are two formulas that I would give to my clients and say, when you sit down to do your um, 30,000-foot view of your business or looking at your business, working on your business, not in your business, these are two good questions to ask yourself. And then don't just stop at the answer, but investigate why. The first one is do your results equal your expectations? Now, for many of us, we have expectations. We don't write them down. We don't speak them out. We don't tell somebody else because then you can hold us accountable.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but for instance, let's say you decide to go to some kind of an event that's um, in the realm of what you do,
Mm-hmm.
and you say, I'm going to go to this event. It's going to cost me time. It's going to cost me money. It may be going to cost me some materials for handouts and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. But out of this, I expect to gain,
Business cards.
yeah, exactly. I expect to gain 5% more customers. Okay, so that's your expectation, 5%.
Mm-hmm.
So you go to the event, you do all your stuff, and then what are your results? What results did you get? First of all, you got to measure them.
Mm-hmm.
You got to measure the results. Okay. Secondly, you got to analyze them compared to what you expected. So 5%, let's say you have 100 customers now, it's getting five more customers. Okay. And let's say you get eight.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's awesome. Maybe you only get two.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But the question is why?
Mm-hmm.
Why did you get them? Was it was it based off of the message that you sent? Was it based on the fact that you're very personable and you're Joe friendly and everybody
Mm-hmm.
loves you and that pulled it in? Or
Mm-hmm.
You didn't make it why. Well, you had the wrong pitch, you had this, you had that, and take time to analyze that,
Mhm.
because the closer you can get your expectations to your reality, the
Mhm.
better off you'll be as you grow your business. You
Mhm.
won't be expecting way more, or you won't be expecting too little,
Mhm.
but you'll be right in where you want to be, and that brings balance. When you
Mhm.
don't make your goal, I don't know about everybody else, but when I don't make my goal, I'm not happy.
Mhm.
If I exceed my goal, I'm very happy. But I don't want to just go with the feelings. I want to go with what was the reality that made that so.
Yeah. Why was it an exceeding?
Right.
Yeah.
And so, and then the second one is, do my actions equal my intentions? All of us have intentions. We have great intentions. And if we followed all of our intentions, our business might be better. And maybe not, but maybe probably it would be, because when we intend to do something, it's like a sixth sense or a voice in the back of your head. You see, you should call so and so. Okay. So what's the source of that thought is not really an issue. It's the fact that you intended to give so and so a call this week.
Mhm.
You get to the end of the week and you didn't call them. Well, why didn't you call them? Well, I didn't have time.
Mhm.
No,
Mhm.
that's no, I don't buy it.
Yeah. There's a
Um,
why.
there's a why. Maybe it's your personality.
Mhm.
Maybe you fear confrontation, or you fear having
Mhm.
to kind of step out over the line or whatever. Well, that's an issue with you, that if you want to be a business owner, you better settle that.
Mhm.
Better settle that. And so I want to, I think it's important.
Uh-oh. Is that on my end or your end?
It would be better today.
Yeah. Okay. You're
Something
back.
I intended to do that I never did, that I should have done.
Mhm.
Okay. And now I begin to work inside myself. I don't like making cold calls. I don't like that. I don't like, so whatever that is, you begin to work that out of you, because one, you're the leader of your company.
Mhm.
So you start hiring employees, they're going to follow the leader.
Mhm.
All right. And so you want to be able to lead from a position of as close to excellence as you can get.
Mhm. And when you're outsourcing, when you're hiring your liabilities, you at least have to have a clarity on what your personal liability is and what
Hmm.
the expectation that you're you're hiring somebody to compensate for that weakness of yourself.
Right.
But you have to be able to frame it. You have to be able to define it. You have to be able to
Exactly.
measure whether or not the person is doing the thing that compensates for that weakness, or whether they are simply a reflection, and now you've exacerbated the problem instead of resolving the problem. I
Yeah.
I saw it in military units a lot. Um,
Yeah.
a unit would be a commander would be really good at a thing, and the rest of the unit would start reflecting that instead of being instead of being a cohesive compensation team, instead of having each other's back in a different kind of way. Yeah, I saw it happen in the negative sense,
Yeah.
in addition to the positive sense. Okay. Uh, do you have like a 3 to 5 minute you want to just expand? Because you've kind of covered the key things that I wanted to address. Um,
Hmm.
there is an idea that maybe if you want to address this, or if you just have something else you want to branch off, that kind of either way. Many times I hear people, they come into a business, they say, I have this skill, and I can provide the service better than the person that I was working for when I learned the skill.
Right.
Um, and I hear it two ways. I hear it's based on their skill and it's based on and I just want to help people. Um, when does helpfulness or too much focus on the skill become confusion instead of generosity? Um, I'm asking this question poorly, especially because I'm looking at the question from two different angles. Um, when the owner says, "I want to help people with whatever problem they have," these are the skills that I bring. There's the question. These are the skills that I bring to the table. These are the capacities I bring to the table. But I want to help people however they need help. Um, so you can either address whether that becomes a an issue or how it plays out in the real world, or
Mhm.
some other topic to just conclude.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good thing to take a look at. Um, and it's finding that balance between, because generally when I just want to help people, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it sounds like I'm willing to do it for free.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Because I'm such a good guy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so it's kind of like, I'll put it this way, it's kind of like raising kids. You know, we're like, my wife used to get upset with our kids because they wouldn't make their beds well. You
Mm-hmm.
know, they couldn't bounce the quarter off of the blanket, you know. And I said, honey, we got to answer this question. Are we teaching them the responsibility of doing it, or are we making them professional bed makers?
Mm-hmm.
Because if they, if they if they do what we would say is a good job, it's not perfect, but it's not, it's not a mess either. So we're
Mm-hmm.
really training them to be responsible, to take care of things and do certain things. So in business, this was always a struggle for me
Mm-hmm.
because I really did want to help people. My goal was to make them successful. But a lot of times we get on our own ways to actually achieving success.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to come to the realization that I wasn't doing him any favors by doing it free
Mm-hmm.
or on the cheap necessarily, because I
Mm-hmm.
wasn't teaching them the life skill of you get what you pay for, or
Mm-hmm.
that type of thing. So now what I would do is I might go a little extra, but it still was going to cost them something,
Mm-hmm.
because I took on a task, let's say, and they're paying me X number of dollars an hour, and I might go a little extra and do something to one of my favorite things was building systems,
Mm-hmm.
building flow and all that kind of thing. And so I might go the extra mile and put some definition into it and so forth and so on, but they still weren't getting it for free. So it's important as a solopreneur that, yes, you want to help people, but in order for you to help people, you've got to be healthy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay? Because if you give everything away and you have nothing and you're not healthy anymore, you can't help anybody.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So
Mm-hmm.
it's keeping that perspective of valuing yourself and your abilities and your talents and those things um, that have been given to you. You can't disallow those things. You've got to understand. Um, there's a there's a saying that says that the workman is worthy of his hire.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So the value you bring has value. It has value. So
Mm-hmm.
you should be able to utilize that to gain value. Um, Another one was, you don't muzzle the ox on the threshing floor.
Mm-hmm.
You allow the ox to eat some grain while they're threshing out the remainder of the grain.
Hmm.
And so those kinds of things are important, and a lot of that comes from your own self awareness, your own self aggrandization, I think is a proper word. Um, but you have value, and what you do has value.
Hmm.
And it just, in my mind, you don't mess with that. I mean, I dealt with it in myself, so
Hmm.
you know, I would just want to help people and help them and help them and help them, and they actually would be very successful, and I'd still not have anything. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult thing, but
Yeah. I saw that in my dad. Um,
yeah, yeah,
he was very good at what he did. And in the early 70s, he was one of the best paid people in his industry in all of Eastern Washington, and he never asked for a raise.
yeah,
And by the middle 80s, he was struggling.
yeah, yeah.
So I'm gonna just wrap up if you
Okay.
um because what this is confirmed for me that the owner cannot price wisely or market the service clearly. Or, and David, you mentioned building the systems and processes. If they don't already understand what kind of business, they don't have the vision for what business they're building toward.
Hmm.
Because the pricing isn't a number, it's reflecting the economics of the business model.
Right.
And if the business model hasn't been declared, then all the pricing advice is going to be all over the chart. It's never going to make sense. It's always going to be unstable.
Yeah.
So, we talked about in the last few weeks, we've talked about instability. We talked about the model collision. We've talked about identity drift, and Dave again brought the issue up of owners who don't even know where they want the business to go. And we talked today about what business are you building? And the question isn't neutral because undeclared structure affects priorities, it affects the offers, it affects the relationship roles, it affects expectations, pricing, the kind of clients that you attract, and the kind of stress that you carry. And that leads us to when, Dave, you're going to come back with David, and we're going to talk about pricing in a global economy because as the business model becomes clear, then we can talk about what pricing fits in this business, not what our fears suggest, not what our panic or self-doubt suggest, not what someone else in a different region or a different market would do for a lower price, but what fits in the structure and responsibility and value of the business that the solopreneur is building. Thank you, Dave, for talking with me.
My
And
pleasure. Awesome.
thank you, sir.
All right. Have a good one.
All right. I've got
Yeah.
a couple customers to talk to this afternoon, and not even preaching to the choir. This whole series is not even me preaching to the choir. It's literally me preaching to myself. Or maybe it's ChatGPT preaching to me. But I'm telling ChatGPT what I want the topics to be. And as soon as it starts laying out the outline, it's like, oh, wait, I'm actually talking about myself.
I know the feeling.
Okay. It's
I
not
know
just
the
me.
feeling.
All
Yep.
right.
All
Thank you,
right. Take
sir.
care, brother.
All right. God bless.
You too.